Wash out 2 times slow, the door will get it done twice as fast.
There you go.
That's how that works. But okay. But I get.
Okay, so I started the screencast a little bit late, but to recap, we've just created a new Rails application with Rails new Hogwarts School, navigated into that folder, and then used Git to capture all of the files that were generated when we ran the Rails new command. We're not going to use scaffolding now. What we are going to do is we're going to use Rails generators to generate the pieces of what scaffolding would build for us, but we're going to fill in the details ourselves. And so we're going to start by creating a few different models. The first one being the house model. So I'll say Rails G for generate. What am I generating? Not a scaffold this time, a model. And we're modeling a house. And the houses in Harry Potter will have, each one has a name. And as students go through their term, they accumulate points for their houses or lose points for their houses. And so I can say points, integer, and I'm just going to leave house that simple. It's simply going to have a name and a number of points associated with it. And so if I hit enter here, we will generate a migration, which will be used to actually make that houses table in the database, and we'll get a model. I go to my Rails guides, specifically the validations. I'm going to open up the new model that was generated for me, and I'm going to put a little bit of validations in here. I'm going to say validates that the name and the points have a presence of true. So we have to include both of them, and we will validate that points has a numericality of, and this is the one I always forget, I think it's integer only, but let's go look at it. Only integer, true. So that is what it means to be a valid house, that the name and the points are present, that they're not null, and that points is a number, and further, it is a whole number. In the DB folder, specifically inside of the migrate folder, we will see a single migration file, and that was generated for us when we generated our model. And in that migration file, it tells us that we're going to be creating a table called houses with the columns that we asked for. So I want to run that from the command prompt. I could do that now, or I can generate a few more models and then migrate all of them at once. That's what I'll do. I'm going to generate a few more models and then I'll migrate all of the different tables at once. So for today, we're going to create 2 more models. Rails generate model student. Again, we're going to keep things fairly simple. A student's going to have a name and it's going to have a house that it references. This sets up our foreign key. It's done so by way of convention. So we already have a house model. So that's why I can refer to it here. That's why I needed to create the house model first, because it is referenced when I create students and teachers. So Rails G model student, and a student has a name, which is a string, and a house that it references. That's going to give me a house underscore ID foreign key in my students table. And then same thing goes, a teacher is going to look very similar to a student, just a name and a house that it references. And then for each one of those, I can go into their models. You can see that a student belongs to a house, so that side of the association is predefined for us. I could say that a student is valid when the name has a presence true. Same thing is going to work for the teacher. Validates name, presence true. The belongs to side of the relationship indicates that both the teacher and the student, the teacher's DB table has a house ID foreign key. Same thing for the student. This indicates that the student's DB table has a house ID foreign key. We could see that if we looked into their migration files. So if I looked at, like, for example, the student's migration file, you can see that it has a name, and then there's the house that it references, which is set to be a foreign key. In the houses model, although the belongs tos were set up correctly for us, the house model was created before we defined that association. So we have to go back to the house model and specify that a house has many students and a house has many teachers. You need one per line. You can't stack those one after another like you can validations.
Can you put those in the command initially?
I don't think so, just because of the fact that, like, when we created houses, students and teachers didn't yet exist. So we have to go back and add those. I'm pretty sure. There might be, yeah. So that's all set up now. A house has many students, has many teachers. There's some validations. A student belongs to a house, has a validation, and a teacher belongs to a house, has a validation. I could either now, if I wanted to do some more version control, I could do that from the terminal. I also have the ability of just doing that directly from VS Code, which I like a lot. You've got this little version control tab here. It shows you all the things that have either been changed or added. I can stage all of those changes at once, and then I can put a commit message. Generated a house, student, and teacher model, added validations and associations, and then it is Control Enter to save it. So that's how I like to do my version control now. You'll see me sometimes still do version control from the terminal, just because that's what I've done historically, so I often just go there first. But I like doing it within VS Code just because it indicates sort of when I have forgotten to go to version control. So you'll sort of see the number of changes increase over time with a little blue number there. It's a nice little reminder. Okay, so I've created all of those models. The tables don't yet exist. I need to run those migrations to make them exist. So Rails DB : migrate is what will go to the database migration folder, or the migrate folder, and it'll run all the outstanding migrations. All three of them are outstanding, so all three of them should be executed here. Boom. So we've created our houses table, our students table, our teachers table. The development SQLite 3 file is present now, and there is a schema file. If we go to that, you can always go to this file at any time to see what your database looks like. So if you forget what your names or your data types are for your various columns, it's all labeled here. There's my houses table, students table, teachers table, and you can see Rails has gone and indexed the foreign keys, put like database level indexes on those to make working with those foreign keys more efficient. And there is the foreign key itself, house ID and house ID on both student and teachers.
What happens if there's no?
That means if there's no schema file, you probably haven't run your migration yet. To run the migration, it's Rails db migrate or db : migrate. Okay, so what we saw last time is that once I have these tables in existence, I can add data to them. I could add data to them by pulling up the Rails console, for example. And that gives me the ability to like interact with my models, and I could go and start creating entries there. I'm not going to do that. The other way we added data with the Ghostbusters example was through the web, but I don't have a controller. I didn't use scaffolding, so there's no current controller or views yet. What I do have is this seeds.rb file. And it's in this file where I can put active record commands that will generate data for my application. And then from the command prompt, I can run Rails db seed, and that runs this file and will put that initial data into it. We cannot just do like Ruby and then go to the db folder and run the seed script. That won't work because it won't bring up the whole Rails environment. It won't have access to the active record models. So we have to run it by way of Rails db seed. You'll get an error if you try to run that file directly. So in this seed script, I'm going to remove the comments that are in there to begin with. And it's in here where I could do things like, okay, I could create a new house by going to house.create, giving it a name, I don't know, Goo. Oh, it needs a name, name. And it has a certain number of points associated with it, 54. And then I could go to that new house and I could go to its students collection and I could ask it to create a new student, me, Molly button, and that will auto associate to the house because I'm building it by way of the house. So I'm going to the house and asking it to create a new student for me. A secondary way of doing that would have been to go to student.create to create the student and then pass in the house like that. House is new house, so like taking that new house variable and passing it to the create command is an alternative to creating the student by way of the house. In both instances, the student that's created will have the house ID set to the primary key of this house. And if I now from the command prompt ran Rails db migrate, seed, that will do nothing. If I run Rails db seed, that will create those two things. We won't see any output about their creation, but if I went to the console now and I looked at house.first, there's my Goo house, and if I went to its students collection and asked for the first student, I would see Wally Glutton. So that's working. I now have a seed script that I can run. Right now it's not doing too much, it's just populating 2 entries into the database for me. I want more data, and I typically, when I'm building a new application, I want somewhat realistic data in my app, just so that as I'm building up the various views and I'm working on maybe some design elements, that I have working data in there. So I'm going to use the Faker gem to generate a bunch of Harry Potter data to go into these tables so that I have some data to work with in my 3 database tables. To access Faker from my application, I'm going to edit my gem file. And so I'm going to go into the gem file and specifically to this group called development is where we add gems that are only available in development mode. And I'm going to do a quick Google search for gem Faker. And then there is a line that they have us use right here. So I could just say gem Faker, and that would pull Faker from the Ruby Gems website. Instead, if I do this, you get like the most recent, absolutely up-to-date version of Faker, because you can also load gems directly from Git repositories and from specific branches. So here I'm pulling down the version of Faker that's sitting right up now on GitHub on the master branch. And then from the command line, I need to run bundle install, which then looks at my gem file, sees that Faker's been added, and installs it. And now we can see in the list of gems that is being used, Faker is sitting there in that list as well. So that's after running bundle space install. I now have access to Faker. Because it's in my gem file, I can now use it directly from within that seeds file. And specific, what do I want to use as part of Faker? Well, I want to use Harry Potter information. I can generate characters and locations and quotes and books and houses and spells. Things have changed a little bit. If I try to generate Harry Potter stuff in this way, I'm going to get some deprecation errors, and then we can go and fix them because the docs are slightly outdated compared to the most recent version of the gem that's up. The Ruby community is really good though about deprecation warnings. So like when something is going to change that has like breaking changes in it, you'll get some deprecation warnings first, and then a few months later, if you haven't fixed those deprecation warnings, they'll turn into errors. So over here in my seed script, I'm going to delete what I have in there right now. At the forefront of the seed script, at the start of it, I'm going to always start off just by destroying all students and teachers, just so that I can run this seed script sort of over and over without accumulating tons of new data in my database. I can sort of incrementally improve this seed script, and it will always first just flush out the database and reseed it. So I want to create a house, and I want the name of the house to come from Faker. And I want it to be unique. And we can, with Faker, we can chain unique into any request. And during the invocation of this script, it won't generate that same house again. We have to be careful though, because there's a limit to the number of houses that Faker knows about for Harry Potter. It knows 8. If I ask for 9 unique houses, it's not going to be able to generate that 9th house, and I'm going to get an error. Yeah, they just put fake ones in there. So it's got the usual 4 and then a bunch of weird ones, or 4 other ones in there that I don't know if they come from any actual lore or if they were just made up. So this is creating the house. I also want to create a certain number of points. And so I can go to faker number and ask for a number between, let's say 10 and 90. And we'll line that up there. So that should generate for me a house with a fake Harry Potter house name or a faked Harry Potter house name. And then I should be able to create a student and a teacher that belongs to that house by way of the house. So I should be able to say house.students.create, and I can go to faker Harry Potter unique character, and I should be able to do that as well. So create a house, add a student to that house, add a teacher to that house, ensuring that they have unique names. And then just so that we can actually see some details after the seed script runs, I'm going to put a little bit of output here. Number of houses, houses, host.count. Puts number of students, student.count. Puts number of teachers, teacher.count. And that'll just give us a little bit of information as to what is happening. And I should be able to now test this out from the command prompt. I should be able to run the Rails DB seed. As I said, we'll probably get some deprecation warnings, but we should see one house, one student, and one teacher created. Or just straight up an error. What do you not like? Faker, Harry Potter, unique. You don't like unique? I thought it wasn't unique. Let me see if we do it without that, and then let's see if we can, will it work without the unique, and then we'll try to bring uniqueness back into it. That worked. Those are here's the deprecation messages I'm getting. It's saying Faker Harry Potter character is deprecated. Use Faker movies Harry Potter. So they're sort of restructuring the gems to probably better categorize things. So Faker movies movies. And I bet you after I fix this up, then the unique will start working. So if I run that again, those deprecation messages should go away. And they do. And now let's see if I can do unique. 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 And that worked. One house, one student, one teacher. We probably want more than that. I know from looking behind the scenes inside of Faker that it can generate 8 houses. And so I'm going to do 8 dot times do with an end down over here. And then oops, indent that stuff. This should generate 8 houses, each with 1 student and 1 teacher associated with it. If I rerun my script, I should see 8s for all of those. That's looking good. And now I can do things like, let's just say, number of students. I can go to Faker number and ask for a number between, I'll say every house will have like 10 to 30 students. Faker tends to give everything back as strings, so I turn that into an integer. Oops. And then I'm going to say number of teachers. And let's just say that there is like 4 to 8 teachers. And now I can say number of students times do, and number of teachers dot times do. And I should now get 8 houses when I output this. The number of students should be variable, somewhere between 80 and 240. No, that's too many then, because there's only 240 students in the system. Let's dial this back down to 20. And then number of teachers will be somewhere between 4 to 8. There is, yeah, there is. You can definitely, instead of doing Faker number, you can do like a math.rand, and the equivalent would be like 20 10 Yeah, that's actually more concise, and then we wouldn't need to cast it to an integer either. So we could do that instead. So that could be math.brand and 20 and math.brand 4 to 8. And I think, let's see if we can run this. We should still get 8 houses. We should get, oh, it's math.random. It's just rand. There's a kernel method just called rand. Yeah. There we are. 8 houses, 126 students in total, and 43 teachers. And that gives me some nice sort of sample data to work with. I could go into my Rails console and I could take a little bit of a look at some of this data. So I could like look at the first house. I could say h equals house.first. This is house Ravenclaw. They have 20 points and 17 students. The first student in Ravenclaw has the name of Marcus Flint. And so I have some nice information. I could go the other direction, right? I could get a student, student.last. I could ask for that student's house name. Thunderbird. I could ask for how many students are in the same house as that student. There's 20 of them. And so I've populated the database and the associations for students, teachers, and houses, giving me something to work with when we build the rest of the application, which is going to be sort of the web-facing part of the application. Any questions or comments before I proceed beyond this? So I'm going to go over to my source control tab here. I could stage all these things. I can also just put a message in and it'll ask me, oh, you want to stage all these things? And I'll just say yes. So I can say added faker gem and used it in the C script to generate fake data. And then control, enter, and it's like, would you automatically stage all these things? Yes. So with that data in place, I now want to build the beginnings of my web application. I'd like to start by creating a houses controller so that I can access some of that house data and display some of the house data to the website. So the seed script I'm done with now, at least for now. I'll leave it behind. From the command prompt, I will leave the console and just be at the prompt here. And what I want to do is run another generation script. I'm going to say Rails G for generate. And now I want to generate a controller. And it is the houses controller. And that's a convention, so I'll always try to name my controllers after the database table that I am sort of accessing. And I know up front that I want an index and a show, a single collection route, that's the index, and a single member route, that's the show. The difference between a collection route and a member route is the member route is going to have an ID somewhere in the URL that specifies which member of the collection is being worked on in that particular route. So I'll say index, show here. So that was this command right here, Rails G controller houses index show. And you can see there was a few different folders and files that were created. I now have a houses subfolder in my views folder. A index and show view was made for me. There's now a houses controller in the controllers folder. Some routes were added to the routing file. We're not going to use those ones. We'll go and delete them. And then some testing files exist. And then some assets, a place to put houses related CSS, and then CoffeeScript. CoffeeScript is a dialect of JavaScript, or it's its own programming language that compiles down to JavaScript. It came out of the Rails community. I would argue now that all the interesting ideas from CoffeeScript have made their way into JavaScript proper. It had a huge influence on JavaScript proper. A lot of the cool stuff we got in ES6 came directly from CoffeeScript. I'm thinking CoffeeScript might just go away in Rails 6 because it's not, I don't think of it as being needed anymore. It sort of showed us what could be in JavaScript, but it's still a default in Rails applications. So we have a place to put our house associated CoffeeScript in this folder, but we won't work with CoffeeScript in this course. You can, yeah. Let's see what else we got here. So I got a bunch of new things that were generated here. So I can go to my source tab and say generated a houses controller and save that. Hitting Control Enter. And now I'm going to open up a few different files, and I'm also going to run the Rails server, Rails S, from the terminal. And then I will just minimize the terminal. The files and folders I want to open up is I want the app controllers houses controller to be open. I want the views, houses, index, and show files to be open. I want the views, layouts, application file to be open. And I want the config routes file. And so I'll reorder those a little bit. Houses, routes, controller, the views, and the layout. We can look at each one of them. Because I asked for an index and a show action within my controller, I've got 2 routes for those inside of the routing file. I want to use Rails RESTful routes, so I'm going to remove those. So initially, I'll just have a do end block inside of my Rails applications routes draw. The controller has definitions for the index and the show. They're empty right now. The views have just a little bit of HTML inside of them that we will remove. And the layout, this is the sort of overarching HTML document into which each view will be yielded. So it's here we can put sort of common markup that we might want to appear on all pages, and each view is yielded where that word yield is. If I go to my browser, I can go to localhost 3000, and I should see that welcome message. We'll remove that as well as part of our work in the routing file, because we don't need that to exist anymore. So I will start off here by doing that, by getting rid of that welcome message. So the command is going to be create a root route for me that goes to the houses controllers index action. So houses hash mark index is a way of saying the houses controllers index action. So I get request to slash will load the index action of the houses controller. The index action of the houses controller is currently empty. And that's okay. We'll populate it with more information in a moment. But if we go over to that, we'll see it. At the end of every action, if we don't step in and add a redirect or a render method, what happens at the end of every action is the associated view is auto-loaded. And in this case, or in all cases, the views are in the app views folder, in the subfolder associated with the particular controller, and then the name of the file is associated with the particular action. So after running the index action, which is currently empty, the app views houses index.html.erb file is what's going to be displayed in the browser. And for the show, it's the same, but the slightly different. I'll just copy and paste that. And then
What's the ERB?
the ERB is embedded Ruby. So that's just the naming convention for our templates. And they compile down to into HTML. Show. So even without anything in here, I should be able to exercise this one route by going to the root of my application. We should trigger the index action of the houses controller. That will go here, loading up this view. It's in this view where we have an H1 that says houses index, and it says find me in, and it sort of says where it's located. So if I go back to my browser and reload the root, that's what I now see. in the routing file, though, I also want 2 of the default RESTful routes. So I'm going to say resources, houses. That would build all 7 RESTful routes for me, but I only want index and show. And so I ask for only index and show. What those will create for me would be the equivalent of if I had created a route manually for each one of them. So the manual creation of those 2 routes, which I will later comment out, could have been done by this. I could say a get request to /houses should route to the houses index action and should be known as the houses route, and a get request to /houses/some ID should route to the houses controller's show action and should be known as the house route. We don't have to manually define those because of this line. So those are the 2 styles of routing in Rails, is these kind of manual definition of like what HTTP verbs being used, what path, and then where it goes to and how they're going to be known, how the name of the route. But that all gets sort of generated for us with this single line here. So I'll leave those in here, but I'll comment them out. So our application should have 3 routes now, and I should be able to see that in one of 2 ways. If I was at the command prompt, I could type Rails space routes and it would show me my routes. Or I can go to the application and I can input a route that doesn't, exist. And I can see the index, show, and then the route. There's the names of them, the houses path, the house path, and the route path. Houses path and the route path both go to the same location, which is the index action of the houses controller. So those things are working. I can load up the houses index by either going to the root or to /houses. If I go to /houses/some number, doesn't even matter if that number exists, it shows the show action. Back index. So now I can step out of this routing file. The routes as I need them in this application are now done. In the controller, I'll put in as a comment a little bit of the routing information, just so that we know that a get request to /houses would load this up, as well as a get request to /. And this one, a get request to /houses/some ID will load that one up. And I will now build these out one at a time, first working on the index and its view, and then working on the show and its view. So this is a collection route. It's supposed to show all of the houses. So now we need to fetch all of the houses from the model. I can say houses equals house.all, or if I wanted them ordered by name, I could do that. The key thing to remember is that instance variables like houses are shared with the view. Instance variables always get shared. Any instance variable you create inside of a controller action gets shared with the associated view. That means inside of this index html.erb, we will have access to an @houses variable, which will be a collection of all of our houses. So let's go over here. At the top of this view file, I'm going to say, welcome to Hogwarts. And then below there, I will say all schools, or sorry, all houses.
You have to install ERB. So install.
And then what I want here is I want an unordered list, like a UL, of all of the houses. And this is where I go into Rails's templating mode, which looks like sort of like how PHP works in its templating mode. Less than % is my ERB block. I have access to that houses variable, and I can loop over each house, calling each house house in turn. I can have a end block so that the block opens here with the do and closes here with the end. And just like in PHP, in the middle here, I can mix and match HTML and more embedded Ruby. So for every house, I want an LI. And at least initially, maybe I'll just hard code in the word house name. We know that we have 8 houses. So if I now go to the index controller action, I should see welcome to Hogwarts, all houses, and then I should see the word house name 8 times inside of an unordered list. I go over to here and I reload this page. That's exactly what I see. There's my house name each time. I don't really just want the word house name hard-coded in there though. I want to go and use my embedded Ruby echo statement, which is a less than % equals. So less than % on its own is just execute Ruby, and then when there's an equals, it means echo. And it's the house name that I want echoed out there. I now reload the page and I see all of the house names. There they are. And then I can say like has and however many points. And here I'm going to use another helper. I'm going to use the pluralize helper, which deals with that special case that we always have to deal with, the fact that if we only had 1 point, it would say the house has 1 point, and then for all others, it would say points. And so we just say pluralize based on the house points, the word point. And now if we ever have a house that has a single point, it'll say the house has 1 point, and then for all others, it'll say the house has 20 points or 30 points. Then I can put a period at the end of that. So now I'm pulling out some information about each house, the name and the number of points in a loop for every house, generating an LI for each house inside of a UL. And so when that ends up in the browser, of course, the ERB is gone, and all that'll be left is just HTML. So if I go over here, load it up, there's the points that each house has. If I view source, you can see there is the generated source. This is what's coming from my view, just the stuff in blue there. No more ERBs because those have all been processed and the data has just been returned. The HTML data has just been returned over here.
Do you know the plugin you're using for ERB?
No, I don't. It was just whatever was default. So that is the index. We'll make it a little bit fancier, but we'll first implement the show and then come back to the index. Before I do that, any questions or comments about this sort of whole flow that we've gone and done here? We've set up the routing, we've coded the controller action, we've coded the associated view. Yep, there's the index. Here's where we have our loop, the li inside of it. So the next step is going to be the show, which is going to be our very first member action. And it's a member action because it depends on an ID that's coming to us by way of the URL. And so if we were to look at the routes that I just put in here as a little comment, a get request to /house/some ID goes to this show action. And what does this want to do? Well, we want to load up a house variable and we want to find a particular house. The find method takes a number, which is a primary key, and it finds that single house. In this case, we don't want a hard-coded number in, we want the value that is in the URL. We will start though by hard coding just to take baby steps. I need to know what a valid primary key is because I've been running that Skeet script a bunch of times. So I'm going to leave my server running and I'm going to launch another terminal. And I'm going to use it to quickly hop into the Rails console to find a valid house ID. So if I just say house.first, it looks like 14 for me is a valid primary key for a house. It might not be a valid one for you. That means over here I can put 14 in here, just initially hard coding the house. And just like above, the @house instance variable will be shared with the view. So above here where the houses variable was shared with the view, now this house variable is shared with the view. And so once I have that in place inside of my controller action, I can try triggering that particular thing, /house/some number. Doesn't really matter. We're using 14 right now, but I'm not using the URL number really yet. No errors are thrown, which is good, and we go to this show view. And so now it's time for us to update this show view. That's done over here. So at the top of it, again, I'm going to say, what did I say in the other one? Welcome to Hogwarts. So I'll say, welcome to Hogwarts. And then I will echo out the house name, which is the house.name. And then I will display its points and echo out the house.points inside of a paragraph tag. And I will put the number of students as well, house.students.size, or count, I guess I could have done as well, and then /p. So there's a very simple view for show where I am echoing out the current house's name, the current house's points, and then using the association to find the house's students size. And this house variable is coming to me by way of the controller, right? So I'm currently, whenever I trigger the show route, I'm always finding house 14 and having that display here. And if we look back into my terminal, house 14 is Ravenclaw. So if I go to my browser Welcome to Hogwarts. Ravenclaw has 20 points and 17 students. Currently doesn't matter what number we put in there, it's always Ravenclaw, because I'm not using that information yet. So that's the last piece of the puzzle that needs to be hooked up, which is over here. I need to use the ID in the URL. When we were in WebDev 2 working with PHP, our get parameters went into the get superglobal and our post parameters went into the post superglobal. In Rails, posts and gets go into the params hash. So I say params, and then I index in at :ID. And so now the route and the part of the route specific to the ID is part of my request here. So the show will actually show the house that I'm asking for based on the URL. So if I go back over here, if I ask for 14, that should be Ravenclaw. But if I ask for 15, it's something else. If I ask for 90, it's not found. And I get a record not found. Couldn't find house with ID 90. And if this was in production mode, it would be a 404. Okay, that's great. Except for I'm forcing the users to navigate around my application by typing things directly into the URL and having them know which IDs reference different houses. That's not ideal. You probably would not want to build an application like that. It'd be nice if I could click on the names of the houses to get to their show pages. And then it would be nice that when I'm at a particular show page, there'd be like some kind of back or home button to take me back to the index. I do this starting in the index view. Over here in the index view where I'm displaying the house name inside of this ERB echo statement here, instead of just echoing out the house name, I'm going to use another helper. So pluralize was a helper. I also have a helper called link to. Link to, the first parameter of link to is what the link text will read, and the second is where it will link to. So if I put in like google.com, then every house name will link to google.com. Not really what I want, but let's just show that in action. Got a bunch of links, each one of them is linking to Google. That's not what I want, right? But that's how we would make a hard-coded link to something. Instead, I just ask link to link to the current house. And link to will just use the routing system to find the correct URL for me, which is pretty sweet. And so we don't ever make our own links in Rails. We always use link to because link to can, in turn, make use of the routing system for us. So we're just asking link to the house. Back over here, if I reload that page, click on Slytherin, and I'm on the Slytherin page. Click on Gryffindor, and I'm on the Gryffindor page. It's got the correct ID up top. I'll stop in a moment and we can fix things up if they're broken, because I only have one more thing to add, which is over in the show. I want a home link at the bottom of the page where I'm going to link to home, and I want the route path to be what I link to. And again, it'll use the routing system to fill in the correct URL, which would just be the slash, or the href that it generates here. Make sure this is working, reload here. I now have that home that I can go and use to navigate around. So here's what I added to the show, which is a paragraph tag, link to home, comma, route underscore path, all of that inside of an ERB echo. And then on the other side of the picture, over on the index side of the picture, we had this link to statement linking to this show, link to the text, which is the house name, and just the current house variable right here. And things are now all nicely wired up as I wanted them. I've got my houses showing. I can click on my different houses. I can navigate around my application. I will pause this video for a moment for today. And so the one last piece is both of these views are being injected into this layout. They currently both have a little bit of similar code. They both have the welcome to Hogwarts at the top of them. So I'm going to remove that from each one. And then I can go into this application file, which is in my view layouts folder. And I can paste in that shared H1, sort of simulating like, you know, if maybe we had a header that we wanted to be on all pages, that would be a place to put it. Or if we had a menu or a sidebar, something that we wanted present everywhere, or, you know, a footer, we could put a footer down here. Right, and now the views are injected at this yield keyword, and they will always have an H1 above them now and a footer below them. If I go back to my application and reload it, the welcome to Hogwarts is there. If I click around, it's always there, and the footer message is always there as well. So it's that little bit of common code. And if I viewed source, you'd see that's this right here. So it's the views get injected inside the body. Some of that comes from the application layout, this and this, and the views are still the middle part itself. Copy wrong. And I think that's all I'm going to demo for today. Just a very quick recap. If you think about sort of the various boxes that are the Rails application, right? We had to first start with our routing file. We used the resource command to define 2 of the 7 RESTful routes. We also overrode the welcome root route, taking it also directly to index. That means there's 2 different ways to get to that index. So we can go to /houses to get to the houses index, or just to the root. They both go to the same place. Once we had the routes defined, we filled out the contents of the 2 actions within our controller, the index action and the show action, one of them finding all the houses, the other one finding a single house based on the ID that's coming from the params hash that in turn comes from the URL. And once we had the instance variables set up, those get shared with the associated views. In the index view, we looped through the collection of houses, displaying links to each house and how many points that house had. And in the show view, we just directly used the house variable to pull out the name and the points, the associated size of students, with a link back to the home. If we wanted, instead of going to back to home, if we wanted to have it return to, say, /houses, same thing, but maybe for URL purposes, that's where we wanted it to return to. If we looked at our routing file, the names of these things, the index is called houses and the show is called house. And so if we wanted to go back, we could go back to the houses path. So if we change that from root path to houses path, over here, when I click home, I'm going back to /houses. So that's, you know, a decision that you would make, you know, when you're sort of crafting how you want your URLs to work in a particular application. You always want to provide something though for the root route because you want to get rid of that welcome to Rails message. You always want something to override that welcome to Rails message. In this case, we just have it being the same thing as this index. All right, that's all I got for you for today. Thank you very much for coming to class and listening to me talk about Harry Potter and Rails.